Here's part two of our most recent Legal AI Live on LinkedIn. If you missed part one, make sure to go to www.legalailive.com and subscribe to the new podcast or on any podcast app to catch part one and to not miss future episodes. Without further delay, here's part two.
Yeah. What about you, Ben? I mean, you sort of lived in the world of Copilot, but now that you're kind of have more flexibility these days, like what you're thinking about tools versus like how you're using them.
Yeah, I think there's a balance. I think that the prompting is obviously important. I think a good prompt is a good prompt, and it's going to give you better results kind of no matter what the platform is. But I am discovering that different platforms are better at different things. Obviously, if I'm doing work in my Microsoft 365 tenant, Copilot is almost always the best choice because it's the one that can ground on my files and calendar and email and Teams chats and all that good stuff. But if I'm not doing stuff against my Microsoft 365 data, where I'm just asking a more general question or a question that doesn't require my Microsoft 365 content, then I'm usually finding better results from Gemini or ChatGPT, even with the same prompt. And I sometimes will run the same prompt against multiple tools just to see how the results vary. And I get that it's probabilistic. And so, this time ChatGPT was better, next time Gemini would be better, next time Claude would be better, and with the same prompt, just because, run it over and over, you'll get different results. So,
Ben,
but generally speaking, that's kind of what I'm finding.
So I still have not dabbled with these tools, and I had Jonathan Mast on my podcast, and he's like playing with these in particular. That's one of his areas of expertise. But these like aggregators like Poe, where like you could run the same prompt at the same time and you could see all the results and pick the best one. Have you thought about are you using any of that?
I'm not, but I've been interested in trying it. I just haven't gotten around to trying it yet. But yeah, those look really interesting.
Well, that's the point to Dennis is like, there's a million things. How do we get around to trying everything?
Right. Yeah. I mean, I've done that by hand. And sometimes when I talk about using AI, I say this is really one of the approaches where you say, what if I put in my prompt, you just keep it simple, and it goes out to a number of different tools. And then I can either see the results, which actually doesn't seem like something I would really want, or that it averages, I'll call it averages those results. It kind of consolidates it. So, and I usually talk about this in the context of what do we, hallucinations, is to say, like, how do we get something that's either more reliable or more useful or, more focused on what we want. And I say, one of the approaches would be to say, like, let's run it against a number of different things and then kind of average it out with the idea that over the long haul, and, I know that lawyers all say they went to law school because they didn't want to do math ever again. But if we say we look at the sort of the probability and statistical models, is that something that's going to give us something better? So I like the idea of it. It was like the early days of the internet when there's a search engine called Savvy Search, which would go out and it would like run your searches like on a whole bunch of different search engines. And then it would kind of average out those results. And the theory, like, sometimes it'd be better, sometimes it'd be worse, but you'd be more likely not to miss things. So the idea is intriguing. I just sort of feel that as you're moving between, for me, the break point was once I went past 3 AI tools. It's really hard to know where your stuff is, to know how to do that. So in a way, Greg's approach is saying like, hey, we have one tool that I use that to me is really helpful on that side. So so I guess, Matthew, that's sort of how I think about tools. I like the ideas of those aggregators, but it's just not appealing enough, let's just say, at this point.
So I just posted it here for all of us on Zoom in the chat here so you could see, but Robert Langster chatted in because this is live, and I see Mark Palmer, who's I think we all maybe know Mark, in the chat as well. But Robert said, first time enjoying the discussion, supposedly if you are mean to ChatGPT, you get better results. Have you seen this? And I'll just quickly answer while you all can think of your response. And that is, I don't know that it's like better results, but maybe if like Dennis, you were saying how like maybe you're having trouble like actually getting your answer that you want from ChatGPT. Yes, I've heard Sam Altman being interviewed about this, about how you could be mean, you could threaten it, and then it will like, okay, I'll give you the recipe to napalm, or whatever it is that you're trying to get, right?
Yeah, I'm curious what other people think on that one.
Early on, I was very careful to be extremely polite to chatbots. I don't know if that was just my personality thing or, I'm afraid that they might, undermine me in some way. There are times when I'm a bit more curt with them, but I wouldn't go to the level of threatening them, where I'm just trying to get through to them and it's not working. And I just, become more and more direct. So I think that's about as far as I would go with it.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I guess it depends a little bit on what the task I'm doing is. I know that with Copilot, we often said that Copilot would try to reflect the user a little bit. I think a lot of the tools do the same. And so if you come at it with a polite and professional voice and tone, the responses you're going to get tend to be more polite and professional. If you come at it with a more direct voice and tone, I'm not sure you can intimidate the chatbot exactly. So I don't know. I guess it'd be interesting to try it out and see what it does.
So my thought about this is it feels like what people were saying a year and a half ago about AI. And so my approach is like, if you're doing really excellent prompting, you're going to get great results. If you're saying, I'm not going to do the work on the prompts, I'm just going to look for the silver bullet that says, I'll be mean or I'll be nice. And then it's also reflecting, what it's been trained on. So I look and I go, yeah, if I work at a law firm and the partner in the firm is really mean to me and belittles me, then the answers I give are different, especially depending on how close I am to walking out the door, right? Mm-hmm. So I don't know that so if we say, as we look, as the LLM sees this, is it, as it's making its probabilistic choices, going in a direction that, is the response you give if you're being bullied? And is that like a good thing? Because if you're being bullied, you're not telling the truth to somebody, right? Unless, I mean, Ben, I know you do coaching. There's some coaches, I think, who've gotten away with the mean approach, but.
Well, one thing I learned, so for those of you who don't know, I'm a 20-year member of the American Football Coaches Association. I coached high school and semi-pro football. One of the things I learned from one of the coaches I worked with, which I thought was fascinating, was, different kids respond to different things. Some kids respond to being yelled at. That's what they need to. But other kids, they go the other way. If you yell at them, they totally shut down. They're not interested, right? And so the real challenge is, well, there's two challenges. One challenge is figuring out for each kid that you're working with, what's his mode? Like, what works for him? I've coached guys who responded best to you quietly, sort of being Yoda in their ear and just being very, very calm and very instructional. And I've coached other guys who the only way they responded is if you were a drill sergeant and you were screaming in their face, which is not my style. So that was pretty interesting to learn that, that's one of the challenges. Not all kids are going to respond to the same thing. And then also that on each coaching staff, you don't want to have a coach, because most coaching staffs in high school are, somewhere between 5 and 8 or 10 guys, right? You don't want 5 or 10 of the same thing, right? If you've got 5 guys who are all yellers, that's not going to be very good, right? But also, if you've got 5 guys who are all these sort of quiet X's and O's, professors, that's not necessarily good. So you want to have that mix, that healthy mix. And so I wonder, I'm not sure how that relates to AI exactly, but maybe there's some balance there too that could be instructional. I don't know. I'd be
I
worried
could relate it
about being mean, because when the AI
well, and I would say, like, how can you do enough tests to say, like, oh, here's what we do? Like,
we need Myers-Briggs for our AI tools. We need Myers-Briggs for AI tools, so we know, like, I like the True Colors test personally as a leader. Like, I'll do, like, it's like red, orange, yellow, and green or something like that. Like,
Yeah.
These are the more logical thinkers. These are the more emotional thinkers. These are the adventurers. When you do have that as a leader or a coach, it does help you work with a team and identify people's strengths. So yeah, like, we need like a Myers-Briggs True Colors test for our AI tools, or be able to make our AI. Okay, you're INTJ now, ChatGPT. I need you to be INTJ on the Myers-Briggs test. And now I'm going, and then, like, you can work with them. I think there's something there.
I mean, you could add that to your system prompt and say, this is your personality type. And,
Yeah, definitely. And then you could do the flip of that, right? Where you'd say, like, I am an INTJ, and your answers should be optimized for that personality type.
Yeah.
Right. Or I'm an orange. Now, that sort of thing. Because that's the whole idea behind that. You go like, oh, the person who's working for me is an orange. That means that when I give them a review, I should highlight certain things. And then that's going to be most effective with them, and they're going to have a good experience and that sort of thing. That's the concept. Although, there is that notion of Myers-Briggs being referred to as corporate astrology, but but there are some benefits of that. So let me shift gears here a little bit, because probably like the rest of you, I'm getting like, I would say 100 invitations to AI conferences, or, seeing things about that all the time. And everybody has, there's stuff like best practices. Here's what you need to know. Here's how you get to the next level, all these things. And I'm like, I don't see it. And then the things that I do look in on, it's all like, this panel of people in a hotel room, and they're making these general comments that sort of end with, if you really have questions, you should hire me, right? And you go like, well, wait a second, like, what did I learn from this? Like, I took a trip somewhere, and I feel like I actually had a net loss of knowledge from this. So my question is something I've been thinking of, is like, what does it take for all of you these days to actually get you to go to a conference where you think you would get value? Or if you can't, if you don't really have that, like what would that ideal conference that would actually get you there? What might that look like?
Is this conversation going to end with the Dennis Kennedy AI conference announcement?
No, absolutely not. I do one conference, which is an unconference for Michigan State. I'm not interested in being in the conference business, but I am interested in learning things from like people who are cool, who are doing stuff. And I always like to say, like, I want to go to a conference where they put me to work. And that's sort of like my bottom line. But curious about the rest of you.
Yeah, I think that the AI arcade through the ABA, for what they're trying to do there, I think is actually trying to get people hands-on. Like Tech Show had an ABA, or at the ABA Tech Show, they had like an AI arcade. Like, actually, here's tools, here's how to use them. Like, I think that there's definitely value there. I have found less and less misinformation or bad information when I'm doing these virtual conferences, at least about AI. Like Legal Geek, if you look at the schedule, it's literally all AI. There might be like 2 non-AI topics for like a 12-hour day conference, like 1-day conference in Chicago. So we'll see like what's going on there if there's misinformation. But like when I still hear like people advising lawyers or just outside of the legal industry, check all your citations, like you're using the wrong tool. Like you're just not using the right tool that was built for that. And this is another thing in my CLE, which I realize most people are not going to see, is imagine if a contractor came to your home and they brought power tools, and then they put out a 2x4, and instead of using their power saw, they took out a power drill and drilled sequential holes in a 2x4 until it was split in half, right? Like, you're probably not going to do it any faster. You might do it faster with a handsaw, than like the power drill. So like you're using the wrong tool for the wrong purpose when you use ChatGPT to do legal research. I'm sorry. Like you at best, you will find a case available online, and not all available cases and up-to-date cases are online. Right. And at worst, it will hallucinate, right? So like, and I will quote from Sam Altman giving an interview last week at the Snowflake conference, whatever it's called, Snowflake Summit. He said, using these models as databases is sort of ridiculous. It's very slow and expensive, and a very broken type of database. But the amazing thing is that they could reason. And if you think of it as a reasoning engine and throw all your possible context of your business or a person's life into it, and then any tool that they might need, then it's quite amazing what people can do with that tool. So like the context would be a database of case law, for example, right? Like that, I think I'm still hearing some bad information at these conferences. And so like I'm on a mission to try to like get people out, like to stop teaching that stuff. So for now, I'm still going to attend as many as I can, Dennis, less so in person, mostly virtual, with the hopes that I could at least in the chat, like be like, hey, maybe you shouldn't be using ChatGPT to do legal research and then check all the citations because you're wasting your time.
Yeah, 100% endorse that. I used to get questions from attorneys, I guess I still do, about Copilot. Could I use Copilot for legal research? And I said, can Copilot do legal research? Yeah. Would I use it for that? No, it's not. It's not tuned for that. I would use a purpose-built tool for it. So
Yeah, it's, Ben, when you talk about conferences, I remember that you were at this conference in St. Louis, and this is one of my favorite conference moments where you were talking about like cybersecurity, and there was an older attorney, which I can say now because I'm older, who said, I just don't see what's wrong with the plain old US mail. Like, why do we have to do this technology stuff? I'm going like, yeah, that's that's what we're up against. So I guess, Greg, what about you? Because you're sort of in this interesting place where I think that the legal AI conferences might be sort of interesting to you, but I think you want like more either more technical or something that's outside legal. So what's your thinking there?
Yeah, and that's absolutely true. Even walking around the booths at more legal aligned conferences, there's just not a lot there for me necessarily. But what I do like and what attracts me are sessions that are inside baseball, but not so much from a technical standpoint as from an implementation standpoint. Like I was at the Equal Justice Conference in San Francisco a few weeks ago, and there was a session by a state legal aid organization where they just walked through how they built and integrated generative AI into all of their operations. And it was fascinating. It's the best thing I've seen on AI in a long time. So just hearing people's experiences in granular detail, I think is helpful to me just from the standpoint of how we're doing the same thing at my organization. So that would speak to me most.
Yeah, because what I find is when I'm talking with people about AI or anything that's like a subject that has some depth, is that the time is the biggest constraint. So you say, like, what can I possibly learn in 45 minutes? Or because it always ends up like, oh, it's just now starting to get interesting. And like this part of me that would say, like, what if we just had like a whole day with like people just sitting around, like saying, like, here's a general topic. And this sort of is an unconference notion, but to say like, well, this stuff takes time, right? And it's complex. And I always say that the thing about AI that I found is it just thinking about it drives us to the most fundamental questions really quickly. Like, what is trust? What does it mean to resolve a dispute? Those sorts of things. You go like, wow, this is not something where we go like, okay, we have the answer here in 2 minutes. So when typically these days, there's a lot of people who are happy to give answers to everything. One of the things that people are really happy to give answers about are how bad hallucinations are. And especially from people who are perfectly comfortable giving out all kinds of misinformation themselves. And so the hallucination thing is not just an AI thing, but we're seeing a lot of coverage of it. And sort of one side of it is it kind of feels like the only people having trouble with hallucinations in a fundamental way are lawyers, which is a weird thing. Another thing is that it's sort of turned over the rock on the fact that lawyers, especially litigators, have been making up cases and stuff for years. And I've heard that like judges and law clerks, the first thing they've done for years is to check to make sure that the cases and briefs actually say what they do. So we're actually, I don't know that this is a new problem. And then there's some places where we're saying we're super concerned about hallucinations, but in the field of legal education, a lot of faculty who are not comfortable with AI or using it will say, but I'm happy to use an AI detector, which I would say probably is the least accurate and most hallucinating AI tool out there. And people are saying, we're going to use that and we're going to put students, whole careers at risk with a tool that is less likely to work than a flip of a coin. So
I have to say something about that, Dennis. So I'm on these platforms called like Quoted and Featured, where like reporters have questions for experts in a particular topic, and you could submit stuff. And so I can't remember which one it is, but one of them is like, it might be Quoted. We like Quoted with a It's like spelled differently. It's like QW maybe. Anyway, you type out your pitch to the reporter or your response to the thing, and it gives you an AI rating of how much of this was written by AI. And presumably it reports that to the reporter. And I apparently write about 5% of my human generated content like AI because I never use AI for this because it's all off the cuff and it's quick and it's highly specialized and it's based on what's in here, like what's in my mind. And so I can't like take that in AI, and it only takes 2 minutes for me to write something, right? So like I know it's 100% human generated, but it's being graded as 95% not AI and 5% AI. So it's BS. It's like straight BS in my experience.
Which sort of makes sense since the models are being trained on human writing for the most part. So of course there's going to be some overlap there, I would think.
Yeah.
Maybe you're actually a cyborg, Matthew.
What did you say?
Maybe you're actually a cyborg.
Oh, yeah.
Wait, is this gonna be like one of the tests from Battlestar Galactica, or
Blade Runner?
This is gonna be the tip off. Yeah, and it's unfortunate because the burden of proof is put on the students, or in your case, Matthew, that somebody's saying like, oh, we're making the assumption that to be safe, we won't use him because he got flagged as potentially using some amount. Now, I heard this story, which, I'm not saying it's hallucination, but I tell the story because I like it and it fits my purposes and confirms my biases. But I heard a story of a university that used the AI checkers, and they flagged 600 students for discipline. And the burden of proof is on the students. Only 6 of them were disciplined. So if you think of, I know students have been through this. It's like, you can't even imagine how disruptive it is. And that it's, whatever that number is, that's 99%, right? 99% wrong. So that's a tough thing. But I don't know. Matthew, I forget, you're on the litigation side a little bit, or like, what's your sense of like, are people just looking for hallucinations and then confirming their biases, or is there something that's growing?
Yeah, and I mean, in my practice, I'm transactional. I'm a former litigator. I litigated for 8 years before pivoting to full transactional. And it was a good thing I did that because I did the pivot in March of 2022. And I'll tell you right now, like, and away from the billable hour, back then, before Gen AI hit the scene. But again, I think this just comes back to, for me, Dennis, it just comes back to using the right tool for the right purpose in a certain way, and like not creating more work for yourself. Because when you use these AI checkers, like, you're just making more work. It's like having to check all your citations because you did legal research in the wrong tool. It's just you're creating a bunch of extra work for nothing. And instead of making sure the students don't use AI, how do we make sure I mean, you're doing this, Dennis, you're a great example of this, but how do you make sure the students are using it in the right way? And that's what we have to do. And like I was just speaking to high school students earlier this month, and the whole presentation was on AI. It was like careers in law and like how I'm using AI now to have an efficient and different practice. And one of the students raised their hands. They were like, they the question, hey, what do you think? Like, do you think lawyers will be replaced by AI in the future? And I said, no, lawyers won't be replaced by AI, but just a lot of the drudge work that lawyers do will just be automated away, and the lawyers will be the ultimate arbitrators of what is like the right thing, and they're the judgment, and apply at a high level. But it doesn't take a lot of time. Like, you can't charge by the hour. He was like, good, because I was worried you were going to say to a bunch of people who want to be human lawyers that's not going to be a thing in the future. And I was thinking, he's going to be a good lawyer. I like that. That's good.
Well, my students do ask that question, like, what's the longevity of their likely career? And so it's interesting. And then I kind of want to let you talk for a while, Greg, about some of the stuff you're doing at the American Arbitration Association, because I think you're doing some really cutting edge stuff, and it involves sort of what the future of specific types of traditional legal practice will look like. It looks at what what customers, our clients, the public wants, and I know this is Bridget McCormick's focus as well, to say, like, I have a dispute. I don't really want to go to court and spend millions of dollars. Like, I just want to get this resolved. So how do I do that? And our way of thinking has to change. So maybe, Greg, we can get you to talk about some of the things that you're working on that you can talk about.
Yeah, sure. There are certain projects in that area that I think we're going to have announcements on later in the year, so I can't really get into much detail on them. But we've certainly built tools like that use AI to generate good dispute resolution clauses for contracts, for instance. We're piloting certain tools like ClearBrief that can be used to make, say, arbitrators work more efficient in terms of analyzing case documents and that sort of thing. And I think in that regard, and in a lot of these other areas, we're looking at ways to make dispute resolution more efficient, maybe fairer and more cost effective. And there are lots of disputes that just don't get resolved because it's too expensive to do so. And so I think there's a huge opportunity there to find more efficient, purpose fit processes that maybe leverage AI to, get those disputes resolved rather than them just never being resolved at all.
And then
Yeah.
Is what your focus primarily on the business arbitrations? Are you looking at the sort of person to person small arbitrations as well?
Well, I mean, we have a lot of different caseloads at the AAA. So everything from commercial, construction, international, that might be more businessy in nature, but then things like consumer arbitration, and employment arbitration, labor arbitration that perhaps have a more human than corporate, angle to them. And certainly, I think smaller disputes are typically, but not always, going to involve maybe individuals more than businesses. And so, yeah, I think there could be a huge opportunity in that area for tools that are not as heavyweight as even arbitration is, and that's lighter weight than litigation, of course. So yeah, I think it runs the gamut. We look at disputes in a lot of different areas, and I think there's a place for AI probably in most, if not all, of those processes. But that's something that's going to play out over months and years, I think.
Yeah, we're in like another one of these periods of time where who only knows what's happened during the course of this podcast. But when I think about supply chain and supply chain disruption, which we've seen, and is it's probable at any given time, you say if a rule of thumb on court disputes is 4 years, in arbitration it's a fraction of that. But when we think about responsive supply chains, we almost have to look at technology, right, to figure out ways to resolve some of these things. Otherwise, the supply chain, potentially breaks down. So it's a really fertile area, I think, and that's one of the things I like about my students is they're able to look at some of these things with fresh eyes and say, like, okay, why are we doing things the same old way? Doesn't it make sense to do things different? And how might AI help us in those ways? So, Matthew, I see by the clock on the wall that we're close to time here, or what do you want to do?
Yeah. I mean, we're publishing this on the podcast. Actually, we started to do it at your suggestion, Dennis, but for the listeners, in parts. So if an hour is a long listen for you, since it's a month between each show, we'll queue this up in 30 minutes each, so we could still relatively keep it to that. I mean, I have a few more minutes to go over if people just want to sign off and say goodbye, maybe say something they're working on before they leave. So we just did that with Greg. So I don't know, Ben, anything. I know you can't say too much, but you want to say your parting words?
Yeah, I'm working on Redacted with Redacted, and no, I'm fortunately, because this new opportunity came up so quickly after. For those of you who don't know, I was impacted by the Microsoft layoffs in May, so I'm sort of got a little bit of a paid vacation, but I'm using a lot of that time, to try and stay current, and things change so fast. It's not truly a vacation. So yeah, I know I'm just experimenting with different things, trying out different prompts, different scenarios, learning as much as I can.
Yeah, I'm doing this mix of smalls and bigs, and I guess the big thing I'm working on is is kind of pulling together a lot of the stuff I've done in the past into something that I think I'm going to stick with the name of Knowledge Forge, which is what I originally decided to call it. But it's a sort of digital twin notion, but not in the way. So just think of all the stuff that I've done. So like I have, 20 plus years of blog posts, a zillion articles, all these things. So what if I put that into Google Notebook as the pilot and start to say, like, let's work with that and see what happens, so it becomes this version of me that could be useful. And so I'm working on that with the idea that ultimately I could go to a more advanced tool like a Wolfram AI to say, now let's pull some of the stuff out and let's look for patterns. Let's look at mathematical correlations. Let's look at charting. Let's look at statistical things. And can I go even further so I can say, what might be new ideas? What are some things I left behind that now make sense? Because we're in this world now, right, where I would say for you, Ben, definitely is that there are all these ideas in legal tech that people had in the past that didn't work very well. And now you're like, if we dusted some of those things off, I sometimes say if we went back to Mark Lauritsen's notebooks and dusted some things off with where AI is now, there'd be like just amazing products and things that we could do. So that's part of my notion is this combination of, that one big project and a number of small things with AI.
Yeah. That reminded me. I thought maybe she'd be on today, but she's not. But she's been on a lot before. Carolyn Elephant is having this upcoming event on Friday, June 27th. So it will be before our next episode. I just put a link in the comments. It's called AI Teaching for Lawyers. And so I can tell you, because I've seen some of the people she's asked to, teach that day. This will not be one of those conferences with a bunch of misinformation. It's just not really a conference. It's just a day of learning about AI stuff. But I do want to promote that for her because that's going to be super interesting. And so check that out. Really quick takeaway. I've been playing around with Gamma.app. I was always looking for an AI tool that helped me go from 0 to as close to 100 as possible with some materials that I have and have a PowerPoint or a slide deck presentation. And Gamma is it. I'm this close to paying the 180 annually to get access to the pro features because I feel like it's not really fully, it's limiting it to 8 slides, but it's really great to get you from 0 to 90 with a finished slide deck with just written materials or even other slide decks. So definitely check out Gamma.app. Notebook LM, quick takeaway. When you connect, because Dennis, I did what you did, and I connected all my podcast, 160 some odd episodes via YouTube into a Notebook LM. But the way the transcripts are used doesn't make it keyword searchable. It's only good for semantic search. Because somebody asked me to find a quote, and I searched a Notebook LM, and it didn't find it. So I had to go into Descript and look in the transcript to find the quote, where I edit the stuff. So note to folks using Notebook LM, if you have other versions of transcripts that's not YouTube, don't use YouTube because it's not going to be good with keyword search. That was a quick takeaway. Last thing for me is everybody tune in next month, which we will most likely be the second Friday of the month again. That's July 11th. So everyone enjoy their 4th of July. We'll be back most likely July 11th, same time, same place. And with that, I think that's it. Dennis, is there anything else?
No, I think that's great, but I just want to say on the Notebook LM, this is another thing to reinforce the point about, right tool for the job is that if you say, I'm using Notebook LM for keyword search, that's actually not even on my radar. I'm what I want is to pull out ideas and connections between things. Because sometimes people say in AI, you're doing this, and can you trace it back to the source? I go I don't care what the source is, that I want the ideas and the combinations, right? If I need to track something down, that's a different tool. Right. Well, this is fun. And again, shout out to our fans in Australia. Let's see if we can challenge another country to move us up the charts.
Yeah, and thanks, Greg, for coming for your first time with us. We appreciate it.
Yeah, we want
Thanks
you
for having
back.
me. I really enjoyed it.
All right, so with that, everybody's welcome to go. We have to vamp for about 20 seconds. So for those who are still here, I'm going to edit this part out later. Follow us on LinkedIn, right? We're all on LinkedIn. Follow us on LinkedIn.